Welcome back to another episode of the Startup Therapy Podcast. This is Ryan Rutan, joined as ever by Will Schroeder, startups.com founder and CEO. Will, you okay with where you're at right now, man?
I'm not okay with where I'm at. It's a huge problem. Why can't I be okay?
I know. What is that? What is it with us founders? Like, we just constantly have to be chasing something or we're not happy. We're like that proverbial dog in the ball. Like, got to have something to chase or we're just not in the mood to be happy.
You know, it kind of pisses me off, if I'm being honest, because this whole time I've been working so hard for so long to get to that next milestone, right? You know, kind of to get to that next finish line. And every time I get to that finish line, there's another finish line and another finish line. And here's why it pisses me off. I love the race to an extent.
Yeah.
What I don't love is I've never felt like when I crossed the finish line, no matter how amazing it was, you know, like when I sold a company or doing all like the milestone things, and I'm talking business, of course, that you can do. It never really felt final. Like it never felt like this level up that I always thought it would be. And so I did what every founder does. Just reset the goalposts and did it all over again.
Move again.
To exactly the same effect. And at some point, recently, you know, I was thinking about the last couple of years, I'm getting tired of resetting the posts. And here's why.
Right.
Not that I don't love the goals. I love the goals and I love the pursuit. I'm starting to ask myself, when did I ever stop to actually appreciate crossing the finish line?
Yeah.
And if the answer is never, by the way, it's never. What the hell was I doing? What was the point?
Yeah, it's tough. And it's funny for me. I always notice that when I hear somebody else going through this, it's so easy for me to unpack that and see the flaw in the logic. And, it's like, come on, man, slow down. You just did something great. Take a minute to appreciate it. And in the next breath, I'm like, okay, but I got to go because I got to go chase my next thing down. Right? Like it's the amount of hypocrisy involved in that is almost unlimited.
For me, it's twofold, right? And again, and I don't want to project me onto other people, but I will say that I've seen this in countless other founders. So I know that I'm not alone for sure. But here's where I get stuck. The whole point of risking everything and taking the amount of effort and risk and all these things that it takes to do what we do as founders, seems really pointless if we don't have a mechanism on the other side of it to enjoy it for what we just invested in.
Yeah.
Right. And I personally, and we can kind of get into this as we think through this and unpack this a bit, but I think there's another side of me that is equally terrified of being okay with that last goal. As if I get off the hamster wheel, somehow I'm going to be worse off. Like my whole world's going to implode if I don't keep chasing the next thing. And it's a dangerous place to be.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. If you've ever run on a treadmill and then you jump off the treadmill and you still have that sense of like forward momentum.
Yeah.
That's how we feel when we stop, right? Like we hit a milestone and we stop running, we stop chasing. There's this kind of, it's not a good sensation, right? You still feel like I should be in motion, but I'm not, and it's disorienting. And I think that something very similar applies when we hit a milestone as a founder within a startup, and then suddenly we can stop. But that sensation is just so strange for most of us.
I'd like to kind of decouple this as two separate kind of concerns. One is this whole notion of resting on your laurels. And I actually, and again, maybe this is part of my problem, but I actually do believe in that concept. Like you shouldn't rest on your laurels. Like you probably should go back and kind of, re-up. But on the other hand, I'm kind of the opinion that if you've never really found a way to enjoy any of your accomplishments, what's the point of the next one? Like if you already know that it's going to be, nonsensical, then again, these are minor goals and or minor efforts to get to them.
Right.
It's spending your whole life to win a Super Bowl, but having no way to enjoy the fact that you won. Like just waking up the next day saying, like, I have to, win the next Super Bowl. And that's all that matters. And it's like, well, at which point does it matter if you could never kind of stop and say, where I'm at is what matters. And what's next is great, but it doesn't trump where I'm at. And I don't know how to contend with that.
Neither do I. The other thing that's really interesting about that is that because we are typically the ones setting the goalposts too, right? So there's not even like any type of a comparative. There isn't a benchmark that we can look at and say, okay, I crossed the line. Now, I wonder if that feeds into it. The fact that it's like, well, oh, but I set that goal. I wanted to build a company, I wanted to sell a company, did that, but that was my thing, and so I. Is there some sense that because it's not defined by anybody else, we can constantly redefine that, and so therefore we feel like we have to? I don't know, but yeah, you're absolutely right that this is one of those behaviors that we immediately re-engage in, right? And this isn't just like, oh, well, I did it twice. No, we've seen this 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times with some founders,
Right.
And to your point around, if it didn't make me happy the first time, why am I chasing? And maybe happiness wasn't what you were chasing to begin with. But certainly you would hope that it would enter the equation at some point, right?
Well, Ryan, let me build on this because I'll give you some personal context here. And again, I think some of the folks that are listening can associate with some of this and can kind of dial it into their own world. But here's what threw me off. When I was a kid, I grew up dirt poor, like crazy dirt poor. And at that point, I just figured if I was anything but dirt poor, life would be Shangri-La. Like that's
Yep.
all I cared about, right? I just want to be able to live in a house and have access to food. That was literally like my biggest dream. And at some point that happened, thankfully. And at that point I was like, well, okay, now what I really need to do is I need to, take what I just learned to kind of feed myself and take it to the next level. I'm building
Yeah.
a company and this company needs to be X big. And this is like, I kind of want to pause here for a second. This is where it starts.
Yes.
The moment I said the company needs to be this big, or I need to make this much, or I need to, whatever my usually arbitrary goal was, I started setting myself up for failure. Not because goals aren't good. Goals are great. Goals are super important. But because I never had any point where I said, if I get to that goal, then here's how I'm going to fundamentally modify how I think about goals. Right. All I said to myself was, cool, I finished this goal. I'm going to swap it out with another goal. And I'm going to swap it out with another goal. And I'm going to swap it out with another goal. And none of them will actually matter.
Never ends.
And,
yeah.
As I started to kind of grow in my career, I built an agency and we grew to hundreds of millions of dollars and we sold it. And then the first thing on my mind, and I see this a lot with founders that have exited, was I have to do it again. Now, to be clear, absolutely no one has ever said you have to do it again, right? You made that up. Any comparison or delusion that we created to think that was thrust upon us is bananas. It's insane, right?
It is.
And yet we kind of all do it, right? I certainly did it. And so I said, I have to build something else. And, as you know, I went out and built 8 more companies and that still wasn't enough. It really frustrated me because at some point, I'm chasing validation. At some point, I'm long beyond like trying to feed myself. And so if all of this is self-imposed, right? If I'm basically putting myself on that treadmill and telling myself I have to keep kind of hitting the arrow up faster button, what the hell am I doing?
Yeah. There's no end game. There's none, right? And it won't stop.
There's no end game, but why do we all keep doing it?
Yeah.
Like over and over. Every person that I meet is, and again, there are some people that come out of the woodwork, pop up on Twitter that'll be like, hey, I've got it all figured out, or I do things differently. I'm super zen in life, which is awesome. I envy you at so many levels. What frustrates me is why can't I be okay with where I'm at? Why is that so broken?
Where do you feel it the most? So if you were to look back at let's say post Blue Diesel, right? So in those moments where you found yourself, nearing that point where the exit was complete, the earnout was done, you can see that freedom coming. Where was your focus at that point? Like what were you feeling in those moments? Was it, I've got to go find something to do? Was it like manic energy, or was there already a list of things that you wanted to chase down? Like what was the core driver there? Can you go back in time and find it?
Yeah. Oh, I know it. I got lucky. Again, it was I hate the word luck for entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are fortunate, not lucky. Powerball winners are lucky. I looked at it as this was a fluke, which again happens a lot. And it's funny because there's no way to fluke that business. We were in an agency business. You're selling
No.
people for time. There's no like special version where people pay you, but you don't actually deliver the product, right? Like
Right.
you have to deliver. It's one of the most complicated businesses there are. But regardless, I just felt like, hey, I had good fortune. It's a one-off. The only way I can feel good about this good fortune is to replicate it and validate the fact that this wasn't a fluke, which was a broken assumption. But the bigger broken assumption was that I couldn't have just been so happy with what had just happened. And a lot of people don't understand this. A lot of people are like, well, yeah, you went out and you bought nice stuff and you were rich. And I was like, I get it. And totally appreciative and I felt, so fortunate. However, what threw me off was, okay, so everything just went exactly the way I wanted it to.
Right.
Why don't I feel more awesome? And again, I talked to lots of other founders who did exponentially better than I've ever done. They feel exactly the same way.
Yeah.
And this isn't just about why can I feel good if things go well. It's really more about why can I feel okay right now? What's always so broken in the right now that I can't wrap my arms around it?
It's the big question. I'm not sure we're going to find it, man. I don't know the answer is not easy for sure.
I'm okay if we don't find it, but I'd really like to talk about what causes this. I'd like to talk about kind of why we keep coming back, back to start, no matter how many times we do something. And the reason I think this is particularly important for founders is because we are on a very goal-driven plan, right? Over and over, goals after goals after goals. But I think we get into this dangerous routine where it no longer becomes about what the goals accomplish. It just becomes about more goals.
Yeah.
Example, if we were to say at the formative stages of startups.com, if we ever get to $1 million, we're able to pay ourselves, et cetera, we've made it. And then we get to $1 million and we say, cool, we're good. Don't need $2 million. That is almost heretical in startup space.
It is.
This
It
idea
is.
that, how could you be okay with where you are if the next goal isn't bigger? But Ryan, how often do you hear people say that?
Yeah, never. But
Why?
what's
Right.
interesting is most of the heresy calls would come from people who had yet to hit those milestones. I think that's what's interesting about this is that a lot of the pressure and a lot of the questions, a lot of that, people seeking for you to validate what's already truly been validated. And I want to talk about that in a second.
Sure.
Comes from people who haven't accomplished it yet. Right? They're looking at you and going, well, man, if you made it to $1 million, like, why the hell would you stop now? Right? And they're sitting there trying to figure out how to get to 10,000 or 100,000.
Sure.
And they're like, well, you made it to $1 million. Why would you squander that talent? Why would you, there's so much more potential, right? And the words that drive me nuts on a constant basis. But I thought it was interesting because it's something that's been echoed in a number of conversations I've had. One just a couple of weeks ago with somebody who's close to selling their business. And he said, finally, I'll be able to prove that this is a good business. And I was like, man, you've been running this thing for like 8 years, paying yourself really well. I know he's paying above market salaries in a market that already pays well. I'm like, how is this not already validated as a good business for you? Right. And it was interesting that you said, right, the reason after Blue Diesel, the reason you jumped right back in was that could have been a fluke. I've got to go validate the fact that I'm a good founder. I'm a good entrepreneur. Right. That shit was already validated, right? You built and sold an agency, and yet we're like, no, I got to validate my validation.
It's not uncommon. That's the problem.
There's a type of insanity somewhere in there, right?
There is, and so I'll give you a more close to home example. More current for you and I. We've been running startups.com now for about 8 years. And, you and I are really proud of what we've done. We've created a profitable business that employs a lot of people. Our culture is exactly what we want it to be. We help hundreds of thousands of startups. I mean, it checks so many boxes, for what you'd want out of a company.
I've got a huge smile on my face right now.
Well, yeah, no, it's great. And then again, and this is where the turn is theoretically, we're there. We set out to do what we wanted to do. And it's not to say that we'd not want to do anything else. I mean, we'd be bored otherwise. But it's almost like there's a part of me that says, if we don't make this twice as big, we failed something. Now, here's what kills me. I don't know what we failed, right? If it's not twice as big, I don't know who cares. I don't know why it keeps me up at night.
Yeah.
And I don't know why I'm supposed to spend the next 5 to 10 years of my life chasing that goal.
Yeah, exactly.
But I'm going to be
But
kept
we
up
will.
at night thinking about it.
But we will, right?
But we will. And I keep getting to this existential place, not just with our business, but talking to other founders. And what blows my mind is no matter what size those companies are, no matter what they've accomplished, they all feel like they're 1 year or one milestone away from where they were actually trying to get.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I've yet to meet any founders that are like, no, I'm exactly where I wanted to be. Again, I know they exist, and some of you are probably listening to this right now. I'm not pretending they don't exist. I'm saying, as a guy who talks to founders pretty much all day long, and
Yep.
probably more so than most people do, it is not a common narrative that I'm seeing.
No,
Brian,
no.
I'd be interested to see if it's what you're hearing.
Yeah, no, the balance is on the other side of the fence for sure, right? You do run into the occasional Zen founder. I would say something, though, interesting as I'm going back through my history of conversations on this topic. Most of them I would say were entrepreneurs, not necessarily startup founders. And I'm not trying to mince words here, but the folks I know who are like, yep, it's big enough, it's good enough. They're running more of a, like a lifestyle business, a nice ATM for them. Maybe it's an accounting consultancy. Maybe I talked to a guy who owns a bunch of food franchises a few weeks ago, and he's super happy with where they're at. It's that kind of business, right? It's not the kind that even really has that potential for exponentiality. And I wonder if to some degree it's that exponential potential that we know that, if you're working in a scalable startup, that somehow it's our duty to scale simply because it can.
Right.
If that's part of what drives us, right? Just because it could be bigger, therefore it better be bigger. It must be, right? I have to do this simply because it can. And I think that's a really dangerous trap to fall into. But I would say that when I think about the guys that I know or the ladies I know who are on that side of the fence where they're like, nope, the business is kind of where it needs to be. The most recent conversation was a real estate broker, and she was quite pleased with the size of the brokerage and the way things were going. She had found a good work-life balance, and she was happy with it, right? But there also isn't exponentiality to that business. She's not trying to become Remax. She's not trying to become Berkshire Hathaway, right? She's cool with where she's at, and it's a good business. She's making great money, right? So she's also not I'm cool with where it is, but I got to go clip some coupons now. She's doing fine, right? She's in a good place, so she's earned some breathing room. But again, that if I was talking to somebody with a scalable, let's say a software company or one of the two of us, we probably wouldn't have the same answer even at the same level of performance. Because we would assume there could be more performance, so therefore we should go chase it.
I gotta tell you, and this is just a moment in time for me as a founder and a human. I'm at a point where I'd like my biggest goal over the next few years to have more to do with actually kind of like harvesting and enjoying what we've done, than being constantly worried about what we haven't done. And here's the twist on that. And I'm terrified of that feeling. I'm absolutely terrified of the idea that I might just want to kind of stop and enjoy what we've done, because I feel like everything, the walls are gonna close in on us. The entire world's gonna implode.
Oh man, I've watched you try to take a vacation. You can't. I've watched you try to do this. It doesn't happen. Oh, Will, what was your most recent vacation, man? Let's talk about that for 2 seconds. I think this will give a lot of insight into exactly how well you can hold still. You took part of a week off recently. What did you do during that week?
I worked 60 hours a week outside and burned about 4,000 calories a day. I went and built an outdoor kitchen.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'm not a downtime guy, right? Like for me, downtime is taking my energy and doing something that's just different. I can't sit on a beach. I get really anxious, just staring at the sun. I don't hate beaches, but in general, I hate being bored. But this isn't, boy, Ryan, this isn't about so much being bored. This is about chasing false idols, right? Like chasing that
For
next
sure.
goal that I already know is not going to get me anywhere. Like my life isn't going to change whatsoever on this next goal.
Yeah.
But in knowing that, right? Almost like you're on a game show and you're looking at, the three doors that you can choose from, and all of them are the wrong door, but
Yeah.
you can't wait to choose one. Right? It's like I already know it. I already know it's behind the curtain. Um, but what challenges me is the part where I can't prevent myself from being comfortable getting off that hamster wheel. Right? It's been
Yeah.
so ingrained in me for so long that what I'm built to do is run through walls. That the idea of not doing it is just, again, heretical. Right? I can't fathom what that would mean. And this is the conundrum I see lots of founders in.
Yeah.
Here's a great example, Ryan. Every founder I know has got this idea that I'm going to go and sell my company for $1 gazillion and sit on a beach, whatever. And then they go and do it time and time again, and they hate it.
Yeah.
And we all run into the same thing. The kinds of people that were built to have those types of outcomes, to build something from nothing and go through all of that, aren't compatible with the kind of people that tend to like just sit on a beach all day. Right? Like
Yeah.
it's the two things kind of are diametrically opposed. Not for everyone, I'm generalizing, but for a lot of folks.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely true. And I think somebody asked me once whether I thought, it was a chicken and egg type question, whether I thought becoming a founder and kind of getting into that lifestyle and, getting used to constantly having something to chase made people who then couldn't stop. Like, was it becoming a founder that led to that behavior, or was it some ingrained behavior, some, the personality of that human, and their background that led them to be a founder, right? Was it, which one was it? I'm not inclined to believe that it's either or. I think there are probably some people who are on either side of that equation, but it is a very common trait of whether that's learned through foundership or you become a founder because you simply can't hold still. I don't know. But boy, it sure seems to be part of it. I want to back up for a second though, because as I was talking about, this need to keep moving, this need to chase. And you said, yeah, but it's about the false idols. I don't disagree with that at all, but I also can't easily decouple the two because I think
How
that
so?
because I think that the idols come from somewhere, right? The idols weren't, as we said before, they're self-imposed, right? So we created that. So where did that need come from? And I would argue to at least an extent that a lot of that is that inability to hold still. So, we're like the Looney Tunes cartoon where you've got the, Bugs Bunny sitting behind the dog with the hot dog, on a string on the stick so that the dog runs forward. But we're the ones holding the damn stick, right? So I can't completely separate those two things in my mind though, because if this was some third party thing that was being foisted upon us and said, hey, you were a great founder, we now expect you to go be a great founder some more, then I'd be like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. These false idols are being put in front of us, but we've crafted those things by hand ourselves.
Well, okay, so think about it like this, Ryan. Imagine we're balancing complacency with sanity, right? It reminds me of this
Yep.
Yeah, right. And so, like, it reminds me of this concept where you've got two ends of the spectrum. One end of the spectrum is fear, and the other one is greed.
Yeah.
My whole life has been based 99% on fear and 1% on greed. Now, I wish that weren't the case, right? And I don't mean greed in a bad way. I mean greed as in a passion to go do something.
Yeah. A desire. Yeah.
An altruistic version of greed, right? The Gordon Gekko version of greed. But that's not the way it's gone. And so what happens is when my desire, my greed to want to go get to that next milestone or achieve something, or have some sort of like financial incentive, et cetera. When that gets extinguished, which by the way doesn't take much, it's the fear. It reminds me of there's this really terrible Stephen King movie like in the 80s or 90s called The Langoliers, and I think it was like a made for TV movie. And the
Yeah, yeah,
concept
yeah.
of Langoliers were these creatures that ate up time, and so you're constantly chasing forward in time so the Langoliers wouldn't come from behind and eat you.
Those creatures are actually called children in real life. They eat up time like you can't imagine.
But like that was always like this concept in my mind that these things were like constant, like that my fear of the past, of my fear of like what would happen if I don't keep running forward, would come and kind of like take me over.
Yep.
And in the early days, I think it was a really healthy fear, to the extent fear can be healthy. It
Yeah,
was a
yeah.
great motivator. I didn't want to go back to being poor. So I was willing to do whatever it took, however many hours I need to put in, whatever it took in order to move forward. It wasn't a greed thing. It was a total fear thing.
Yep.
And then at some point, I was okay. I had food in the refrigerator, I had a roof over my head. And I thought, okay, well, now I'm going to be greedy. And again, greedy in a good way. Greedy in like, hey, let me go thirst for life and go after things.
Yep.
But you know what? It never really manifested. That greed never really became a thing. It continued to be fear. And so when I'm balancing complacency with sanity, really what I'm saying is I'm at a point where I know the sanity part that I can probably just be okay. But I'm terrified by this complacency idea, these Langoliers coming after me, right? That if I'm complacent, the whole world is going to like take over and eat me alive. That I'll be worth less, or validated less, or any of these really kind of made up things. Um, and I think that psychology is fascinating because it makes it really hard for us just to stop, just to take a moment and be like, dude, I'm okay.
Yeah. Now, the fear piece it's such a tough one to wrangle because there's such a flaw in a piece of the logic there, and we're all guilty of it. And that's that there's a few things, right? So one is like the champion mentality, right? So I've achieved it. I did the thing I wanted to do, whether it was just to build the company and develop stable revenue, or, build it and sell it, whatever it was, we've achieved that thing. And now we get this champion's mentality that somehow now I'm the champ, but now I have to defend that, right? And that's kind of what you were talking about before, after Blue Diesel, right? So the idea that my reputation isn't concrete in that sense, right? I've achieved something now, but I could undo that, or that could be undone. The irony here is that the very thing that we go and do next is the thing that's most likely to destabilize us, which is to go and start something else, right? Like,
For sure.
hey, I want to make sure I don't lose any of this gold I've amassed.
Right.
Let me go do the most risky thing I can think of, right? Like, and yet this is the behavior that most founders engage in. So there is something deeply, and I'll say it, beautifully flawed about all of us, I think. But oh man.
All right. So let me say this. My concern is that I don't see enough of the founder narrative. The founder narrative to me, like the version that I see is when we're two of us are sitting in a room, or you're at a cocktail party, and someone says, "Hey, I'm actually good with where I'm at. I don't really care if we grow the business this year. I don't really care if we add more people. I just want to be happy." And I gotta tell you, I've been doing this a long time. I've never seen someone say that. I mean, I would give them a giant, well, maybe not a COVID hug. I don't know what you do, like a fist bump. I don't know what it is, but I would give us some current embrace if someone would just break down and say that in some sort of founder setting.
I think in this case, you're allowed to hug. I think you're allowed to break the rules at that point. Social distance isn't a thing. If somebody actually transcends to that level of founderdom, they get a hug.
Okay, so but this is where I'd like to just spend a little bit of time, if we would, about how a big challenge that we face as founders is being okay with where we're at, is setting a goal and say, hey, I'm here. Like my goal right now is to stay here, is in heaven forbid, enjoy it.
To actually be happy with where we're at. Yeah.
Yeah. It's Tom Brady winning a Super Bowl, going in there, hey, Tom, what are you going to do next? Like, dude, I just won a Super Bowl. Like, I'm going to actually enjoy being the guy that won a Super Bowl. Right. And that's what I'm going to do next. And I don't see enough of it. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. Again, billions of people, I mean, they all have their own path, but I'd like to see more of it. I'd like to see more of it myself. I'd like to see more of it with other founders. And I think it would be a really healthy kind of Zen movement amongst us to be able to say where I'm at is where I want to be right now, and not have to defend that. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I have the to show how deep this goes. I had a conversation probably about a month ago now, where a friend of mine who runs a fairly large company, $20 million annual, and he came and he was talking about one of his mentors, from that he's had for 10 or 15 years, was giving him some praise. And as he's telling me this, something, oh, that's really nice. This guy reached out and he's giving kudos. At the end of this, my friend goes, I just hate patronizing shit like that. I was like, wait, what? Like, how deep does this go within us that even when somebody else comes and tells us, like, you're doing a good job, man, you've built a great business, like, he took this as this guy patronizing him. I'm like,
how dare you?
Man, how dare you tell me I've done a good job, you bastard? You trying to slow me down? You trying to hurt me? All right. It was unreal.
But here's another side of it. And it's something that, as I rewind back and look at different stages of my life, what I'd wish somebody maybe give me a little bit more guidance on, and again, this is part of the reason we do this podcast. I hope somebody else picks this up. I kind of wish at different stages of my life, I kind of said, look, right now, yes, I have some more goals in mind, but right now I'm going to basically harvest the value of the goals that I just accomplished. Right?
Yep.
For example, you're 27 years old and you say, you know what? By all means, like I'm setting some stuff up for what I'm going to do in my 30s, but right now I'm really going to enjoy being 27. Right? It just for 6 months, a year. I mean, the time period doesn't matter. So the point is, you do it at all. I'm 45. Like this is actually probably a pretty good time to just enjoy the fact that I've got a happy, amazing family.
Yep.
That business is good, my friends are good, my health is good for a second. And just enjoy it. But I'm probably not going to.
If not now, when? You're probably not going to, but yeah, I mean, like, if not now, when, right? Like, what conditions would possibly change to make it better, easier, more acceptable, whatever, right? Like, and I think that's, there's a lot to be learned from the practice of mindfulness here, which is just to be okay with the present. That's the whole point, right? To be present, be in the present, and to be okay with it. It does not seem to be a core skill of the current day founder. Farmers figured this shit out a long time ago, man. They plant the same thing every year, then they harvest the bounty, then they enjoy it, then they rinse and repeat, right? They're not trying to make it bigger and better and different every year. Like they know what they need to plant, they know what they need to harvest, and then they reap the rewards and they do it again. We don't seem to have that.
There's one other aspect to this I just want to dig into for a second, which is, how the disposition of leadership rolls down throughout the rest of the organization.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And so, I've seen with other organizations where the leadership is just like, it's a kill yourself mentality, just like, run. We have to hit these goals, whatever. It gets pushed down to everybody. And now the entire organization is totally miserable. Right? Everyone's miserable. And the idea is that there's some amorphous mythical outcome that we'll get to. By the way, they never get to it. Maybe the IPO, maybe they do something like that. Yeah. It rarely ever happens. And yet everybody gets pulled through the ringer altogether. Right? My point to this is, as founders, we have to be exponentially mindful of our, kind of mentality and approach, and how that gets, rolled into the organization and everybody else's approach. If I feel constantly uncomfortable, I'm going to make everybody else constantly uncomfortable. And now I got to start to think of like really what the exponential effect that has of everybody that I'm working with. You know what I mean?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, even if you look at that from a slightly different angle and you say that even if it wasn't negative energy being passed down and dissatisfaction, it may be, I'm trying to go back in time now and see if I've ever been susceptible to this, but it may be the case that because, obviously as the founder, these decisions impact us differently, right? If we decide to slow down as a company, let's take startups as an example. Part of what we sell to people that want to come on board is this vision that, we are out there, we're chasing down our startup dreams and we're helping to build a better startup universe. And we've got all these things we want to accomplish, right? Now you've got an entire team. Let's say it's the opposite of being depressed or sad. They're hyper motivated. They want to go out and win battles and do great shit. And then all of a sudden the founder's like, maybe we just pump the brakes a little and be happy with where we're at. You get all this momentum built up behind you. It's like a train at this point. Yeah. So that now you feel again, like, because there are these times where we feel like we have to do this, right? Because we told somebody we could once, right? And they don't remember that, but we said, yeah, we're going to make this $100 million business. So therefore now we said it once, so now we have to do it, or we're frauds, or
Right.
we're charlatans, or something else. You got a whole team motivated. You don't want to lose that momentum. You don't want to lose the motivation. I think that momentum is one of those really, really dangerous concepts within a startup. In the beginning, we have to work so hard to achieve it. And then later in the business, after we've achieved it and things are going well, I think we become controlled by it to some degree, and we feel pushed forward by that momentum. And it's no longer a force that we're trying to create. It's perhaps even when we're trying to resist, just so we can be okay with where we're at.
Right. Right. I guess that's, the source of my frustration is that I think about how we're constantly pulled, particularly in startups, and isn't always in the rest of our lives, but certainly in startups, we're always pulled to this next destination that is never now. It's wherever we're at now just doesn't matter. We're always pulled to this next destination because, quote, that's what startups do, right? Startups are supposed to grow up and to the right. That's the only way we work. And I think there's some value in some of those goals. I'm not trying to be anti-growth, but what I am saying is those goals need to be qualified and quantified. We can't just say up and to the right is always better. Maybe up and to the right isn't better, right? Or said differently, maybe that next goal we're trying to get to, actually, we haven't played out whether or not we're better off for it. It's just bigger than what we have now, right? I think it's a dangerous mentality.
100%, right? We talked about this in another podcast where we talked about growth for the sake of growth and how dangerous that mindset can be. And it's a piece of the same puzzle we're talking about. I had a reflection once of my own where I realized, I didn't understand why necessarily, but I absolutely came to the realization that for me, the pursuit of something is when I'm happy. The completion of it, I become satisfied. Like there's satisfaction in the completion, but there wasn't happiness in the completion.
Sure.
And for me, I'm putting happiness higher on the pillar than satisfaction, right? And so,
sure, I get that.
And I think that's a big part of what motivates me back into to do the next thing and try to make it bigger, try to make it better, because it's the pursuit where I'm happiest. Ironically, it's also where you're the least happy, right? It's that ebb flow, rise and fall, up and down of being a founder. But the happiest of the happies were during the pursuit. Whereas then,
agreed.
Once it happens, it's done. I think there's also some sadness to that, right? Like I've achieved it now. It's over. Nobody likes that feeling.
I've always been a huge video gamer, right?
Yeah.
And my saddest moment in a video game is when I've realized I've already won, right? Regardless of whether I got to the end, like once I have the biggest gun or the biggest stats.
Your character's leveled up all the way. Your tech tree's done. You're like, now what the hell do I do? Exactly.
Right. And so it's in the early stage when you're running around looking for one bullet and one gun or the the knife. For some reason, every character at the beginning of a game always has the most useless weapon, but whatever.
Yep.
You kind of get to a point where like you're super excited to hit those milestones, and that's awesome. And I agree that when you get to that kind of end game, it's always kind of bittersweet. It's never what you thought it would be.
Right.
You start back up and do the next thing. The only difference is, as you know, Ryan, our lives aren't games, and we have real costs to saddling back up and doing it again. Often we're drawing energy from a lot of other places that are probably missing that energy from us. That that time, that energy that we can give. And I think if we're constantly trying to like fill a bucket that doesn't need to be filled, there's consequence there, and that actually genuinely concerns me.